higher clock speeds, and you also don't need so much voltage. Now, supposedly AMD are going to be employing aggressive clock gating. This basically switches off parts of the processor when it's not being used. Once again, this is not new clock gating. Intel have been doing it as well as other companies, but AMD are going to be employing it rather nicely with Zen, which is good. And also introducing a write-back level 1 and a cache and a larger op cache. So there's going to be less fetching of instructions from the DDR4 memory, because that means that if the common instruction is already held somewhere on the silicon locally, then you can reserve power, or rather save power, from not having to do so many fetch instructions, and those fetch instructions, or rather that part of the CPU, can be doing something more important, like getting instructions which aren't necessarily always used, which is kind of handy. Naturally, all of that stuff sounds great, but it really comes down to one thing and one thing only, and that is performance. Unfortunately, there's a lot of rumours and speculations on Zen, but AMD have been obviously pretty cagey on all of the information thus far. Hopefully, once again, the New Horizon event shall give us a lot more insight into the processor. But for now, we do know some things for certainty. Once again, we're going to cite the 40% improvement over the previous generation of processors, and that does tally up rather nicely with the Blender tests we've seen. That plus some Cinebench and other standard applications, along with a whole bunch of rumours, tell us that the CPU is going to be at least roughly on par, if running at the same clock, as Intel's current latest and greatest. For example, Zen versus Broadwell E, with the same number of cores, same number of threads, running at the same 3 GHz, Zen ever so slightly pipped it to the post. And once again, supposedly, this has been the same with another leak which said that the memory controller at the time was, and I quote, finished, and basically it was limited to just 2133 MHz with DDR4. Combine that with the fact that it was still on course to at least be evenly pegged with an 8-core 16-thread i7 5960X. Other rumours have said that it's about on par with the high-end Haswells. Others have said between that and Skylake. Now, remember, Kaby Lake and Skylake are the same architecture. There was some rumours early on that Skylake and Kaby Lake were going to see some IPC differences, but that is not the case. The only difference between Kaby and Sky is, well, it's a more mature manufacturing process, therefore clock speeds are higher, therefore AMD don't need to beat the IPC of Skylake. What they do need to do is to be pretty close to them in terms of clock speed, and there's the rub. Now, we don't know the clock speeds of Zen. Once again, engineering samples were running at 3 GHz, but that means diddly shit. So, Kaby Lake's i7 7700K only has 4 cores and 8 threads, but it does run at 4.5 GHz, which means that it's got a massive clock speed advantage. At least if the engineering sample clock speeds are the final ones for Zen, which is very unlikely. Now, the rumours have it that the base clocks of Zen are between 3.3 to 3.5 GHz, but there are some people insisting that that's because these were engineering samples from several months ago, and therefore there is improvements to retail silicon. Other rumours have pegged the chip to run at 5 GHz with liquid nitrogen 2, but this is with poor voltage scaling, because once again, the silicon is still pretty early, and thus it's a bit difficult to know. This leaves us with a few possibilities. The first possibility is that the final clocks of Zen are going to be very similar to Intel. So, let's for the sake of argument say Zen is going to be clocking at 4.2, Kaby Lake might come in at 4.5, or Zen might be 4.1, Kaby Lake might be 4.5. In other words, yes, there is a difference, but it's not going to be massive. The second option, and obviously this is possibly the worst one, is that AMD cores are going to be running at much slower speeds. Once again, let's just take Kaby Lake at 4.5, and let's say Zen runs at 3.8, but it offers more cores, but for a similar price point. The option, I guess, the logical third option is that they are running slower, but AMD offer the same number of cores for a lower price point. That would probably be about the best option. So yes, they're going to run at 3.8 or whatever gigahertz, but AMD are going to choose to place the chips on the market at a much lower cost. So for example, a chip which you might cough up 350 for Intel, which would be a 4-core chip, you might pay the same but for an 8-core chip for Zen. So what about Zen's platform overclocking, and what more about pricing? Well, this is where it starts to get a little bit weird. We do know that AMD are working on a Black Edition Zen, and this will sport higher clocks than the SR7, which once again is the high-end part, both in default and overclocking, but there is a price premium for those. We all know, however, that Zen as a Summit Ridge should mean all parts are overclockable. But for most folks, you're going to want to opt for an X370 or B350 board. Now, this means that it's AM4 all the way for Zen on the Summit Ridge platform. The X370 is the best of the bunch. It is a board which offers 2 PCIe 3.0 slots, meaning you've got Crossfire and SLI support, although you could technically have more if the vendor decides to put in the requisite components. But overclocking options are known as Overclocking Plus. We're not 100% sure what they do yet, but one possibility is that they offer better memory timing controls, perhaps even more fine-grained controls for frequencies, perhaps North Bridge, whatever, and also additional, perhaps, power distribution and better voltage regulators. We don't know about that one, however, that's some guesswork. The B350 is very similar, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people opt for it, especially if you're not hardcore clockers, or you're only ever planning to run one GPU. But it's going to be cheaper, but obviously the absence of that secondary PCIe slot does limit you somewhat for your, well, upgrading. Now, we're not sure how the chips scale with voltages. As I've mentioned, supposedly they aren't scaling well at the moment, but AMD are working on them. The chips do run at 1.3 volts at default, but with better cooling, supposedly you can push in about 1.4